We are live, so
Glad to
thank you
be
so
here.
much, Billy Hume, for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on my podcast about Mixed Talks. What inspired you?
You know, I don't know what actually inspired me. I've kind of always liked music. When I was a child, I sang all the time. It just seemed like something I always knew I wanted to do. I think there was a point where it just kind of clicked in my head that this is what I should do, but it just seemed kind of always obvious. But I actually got into music originally as an artist. I was a singer, guitar player. I started on drums. I played in bands for years. I got into recording really early because I was very interested in it, but my primary goal was to be a rock star. So I had bands for years and toured and played in other bands. And I just don't know what necessarily motivated me as much as it was just something I kind of always knew that I wanted to do and loved music and just found that it was important to my life.
What is the significant factors that have contributed to building your distinguished legacy in recording and mixing?
I think my primary motivation is that I just didn't want to get a job. The idea of like having a job, and because I liked music, it just seemed like the obvious thing. And I think my motivation was also I wanted to make great records. Initially it was more as an artist, but as I got more into recording, I wanted to be able to record them. I kind of wanted to be able to do it all, but I was a huge fan of Pink Floyd. Really liked the way their records sound, and I always thought that recordings should be like a journey into another world, like a movie.
Yeah. What is the approach for building strong working relationships with artists, producer to ensure creatively fulfilling collaboration?
I mean, if I'm working with an artist, I try to go see them perform. I try to go to what they're doing. If they're performing or if they got videos out, I'll do some research of that. I ask a lot of questions. And it's not just about getting to know them, but it's since I do so many different things. I'm a mixer, I'm a producer, I'm a songwriter, I play guitar, and I've worked in multiple genres. I think for me personally, my challenge is, why is somebody even approaching me? It's easy to assume that you think you know what a person is coming to you for, but often they're actually looking for something a little different. Like maybe they're actually looking more for songwriting and production. Sometimes they just want mixing. Sometimes they're wanting their music to sound a certain way. So by asking a lot of questions, and I also like to sit with an artist and listen to music together, not really doing a session, just kind of hanging out and talking and saying, hey, have you heard this song? And you play the song and then they go, oh, have you heard this song? And I feel like a lot of times that is more informative than being very technical about it, just hanging out and having an evening where it's just like two guys sitting around listening to music. And a lot of times that is the best way to learn about what an artist is trying to do.
Are there any specific technological innovation that have significantly improved the way you approach mixing?
I think the biggest thing for me had to do with moving into recording in the box on a computer. And mainly because I could save what I had just done. In the old days of working on analog, at the end of a session, I would make a rough mix and maybe write down where the faders were at on a piece of paper. But next time they came in, I'd have to kind of set it up and you do the work. And then when it came time to mix, each time you worked on the song, you had to kind of start from scratch, which in some ways can be good because it might give you a different interpretation of the song or a different understanding. But when you're doing a lot of sessions, it's nice to be able to just bring up where you were and continue. And the other thing, and this actually relates to another question that you had sent to me, and that is I think one of the main things about the technology of recording in a computer is being able to mix as I go. So if I've got an artist in and let's say we do drums and guitars, or maybe we put down some keyboards and program drums and some vocals, I can start actually mixing, do some initial mixing. So as I add other elements to the production, then I'm making the decisions on the sound and the performance based on what's already there in the context of how it might be mixed. In the old days, with an analog machine and a mixer, if you don't have a great rough mix while you're working, maybe you're missing something. Maybe you're not hearing it the way you really intend to. You're just trying to get through the session. And later on, you realize that there was something about the way you EQ'd something or approached something that's not really meshing with something that's already there. So I think, to me, the biggest innovation is being able to save where I'm at and just pick up as if I was continuing 5 minutes later.
Behind you, there is, in your beautiful studio, so much gear, amps, guitars. So how do you adapt your selection of gear to suit different genres or artist preferences?
Kind of comes back to talking to the artists. I had this one artist a few years ago that was really into piano music, and I kept bringing out the guitar, and she'd be like, no guitars. I don't want any guitars on the album. I was like, okay. I did actually put some in there. But, it's kind of more based on what the artist is looking for. I do like to try to challenge artists and bring things out that they've never heard before, like maybe a certain effect on a guitar or a type of guitar. Sometimes I remember, I'll give you a good example. When I first started working on rap music, one of the first songs I ever worked on with Lil Jon, I'm a mandolin player. One of my favorite instruments is mandolin. And I just grabbed my mandolin, and he didn't know what it was. He called it the little guitar. I said, no, this is a mandolin. And I put something down, and he liked it, and ended up on it was a song with Bone Crusher and his group, the Lyrical Giants, and it actually got on the radio. And I think it was on Tommy Boy Records, and it was probably the first thing I ever heard that I had done on the radio. But yeah, so it was one of those situations where, like, just challenge. I would never think of putting a mandolin on a rap song, but it just kind of hit me as I just pulled it out, and it worked.
Well, super cool. I mean, there is this fun fact about your story, and also talking about the approach, the method to choosing the right microphones, like drums and vocals.
Well, there's certain, when it comes to drums, there's certain mics that everybody knows to use. Putting a 57 on the snare drum, and maybe some Sennheiser 421s on the toms, and then there's a variety of kick mics. If I'm in my own studio, I only have a certain amount of mics, so I kind of use what I know I can use. If I'm working in another studio, one of my favorite things to do when I work in another studio is to ask the engineer, what do you use? I don't care if they've worked there a year or 10 years. I'm always curious what they use, and often they'll introduce things to me, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. Like, oh, yeah, we use that on kicks all the time. So it's like, well, we'll use that today. So I'll often kind of just do what the engineer says. It's kind of like this thing I'll do when I go into a restaurant. Instead of ordering the meal that I usually like, I'll just ask the waiter to choose something for me, and I'll just eat it. It's the only way to learn. So I kind of do the same thing in the studio. However, when it comes to vocal mics, sometimes I'll work with somebody and I'll kind of know, like listening to the voice, an idea of what they'll probably sound best on. But one of my favorite things to do is set up, 3 or 4 mics and have the singer go through and try them out, and I'll listen and I'll hear what I like the best. But I always ask the artist, which one do you like best? And I always use the one they like best, regardless, because it makes them feel better. That maybe there's something in the headphones. Maybe they just like the look of it, but if it makes them feel good, I'm going to get a better performance, and I'll find a way to make the vocals sound good, because a little difference in the EQ or whatever is going to make no difference if I don't have a good performance. So my main goal is to get a good performance. So I just pick the mic that the vocalists like.
Yes, super cool. I mean, this fact of sharing the knowledge to learn every day, learning from everyone, it's very truly valuable. So what's your approach to drum tuning before recording?
That's actually that's a good question, and kind of a funny question for me, because I used to be obsessed with drum tuning. And actually, I have this tool called a drum dial. Well, so there's a lot of different theories in tuning. Some people they tap around the edges and they listen to sound. Some people go just based off pressure. So there's this little tool called a drum dial, and it's got like a dial meter on it, and you put it down near the lug, and it tells you the exact tension, and theoretically you're supposed to match them all up. And I actually pulled mine out for the first time a couple of weeks ago in like 10 years. I used to use it all the time, and I just wanted to try it out again. And you get it closed, and if you want it to go up and down, the idea is that you go around each lug and you use this drum dial. Sometimes I'll just kind of do a similar thing with my fingers. I also went through this period of time where I would try to tune all the toms to the key of the song. And I went through that a lot when I was doing these more jazzy type of bands or jam bands, these kind of more experimental, artsy instrumental groups. But that took a long time. And then listening back, I was like, yeah, sometimes that makes a difference. Kind of what I'll do a lot nowadays is I'll ask the drummer to bring over, like, if I got a drummer and he's got his own drums, I'll say, hey, bring over 3 snare drums. And I just put them up and I listen and I pick the one that I think's the closest. And then I go up, go down. You could get too kind of caught up in all that. I kind of just go with what the drummer has to a certain degree. And then usually I spend a lot of time on the kick drum. Like, is it too flabby? Does it need a little bit more punch and all that sort of thing? But I don't really do the tuning to the key of the song thing anymore.
Okay. So it's pretty cool. So you spend a lot of time to find out the right sound for drum tuning and then shaping the overall sound. How has the transition to digital production and distribution influenced your mixing techniques?
Not really any way so much. I guess that, with the digital thing, there's more tools. I don't really use a lot of that stuff. I mean, you got to realize that a lot of the stuff I'm mixing, I'm also producing and recording. I think the main thing is initially when I got into digital recording, I found myself turning up the treble right off the bat, whether I was recording or mixing, because in the old days with tape, you tended to lose your high end on the tape. As you played the tape over the heads as you're recording, it would literally wear off the high end. So if you're working on an album for 6 months, the earlier tracks had less treble on them than when you recorded them. So we all got in the habit of cranking up the treble as we went in, and also to push against the noise. And then everybody got into digital and started using the same techniques. And they go, oh, digital's thin. It's like, well, it's because you're cranking up the treble. So it was the first thing I had to learn to turn that back. I had to kind of undo a couple things and not always record quite as hot. With tape, you could hit the tape really hard and it was great. With digital, you got to bring it down a little bit. But beyond that, I don't really think much has changed because I'm really focusing on performance and emotion. I'd say with streaming and the way people listen to music, I will reference on a more variety of speakers, like cheaper speakers, and then I'll email an MP3 to myself and listen to on my phone just to make sure, that it sounds good. I think those are probably some of the main things that I do.
Okay. I understand. So it's pretty cool. And talking about DAWs, I know that you use Pro Tools, right? And it's your main DAW, your favorite DAW, or do you also use some of the others?
It depends. I'm a huge fan of Ableton Live. Not for mixing so much, but more for production. Although there are things you can do in Ableton mixing-wise that you can't do in Pro Tools. Like within individual tracks, I think they call it grouping, which I don't know why they call it grouping, but it's the way that you can add more effects onto an individual track. Pro Tools is more like what I consider a professional DAW for mixing and engineering. It's built on, more the concept of traditional recording in a studio with a mixer. And it's great for that, but it's not an inspiring platform. It's like a cold technical platform. And it's kind of like, it's like a rigid metal frame, like this metal structure. Whereas Ableton to me is like clay. You can do a lot of different things in Ableton that somebody else you meet might be doing the same thing and they'll do it a completely different way. So it's got a different kind of flow to it and a different feel. I'll spend sometimes a month just working in Ableton, and then I might get on another project and I'm working on a month just in Pro Tools. But those are my 2 main platforms.
Okay. Super cool. And talking again about analog and digital realm, what they are the key elements?
Boy, that's a tough one. I've been working in digital since the late 90s. So I don't remember.
Okay.
I mean, maybe I thought about all that stuff back then. I've just been doing this so long, a lot of this has become integrated into what I do. I don't know if I don't really know how to answer that one. I've been doing this a long time, so a lot of stuff kind of merges
Wow.
together. I will say, however, here in my studio at this time, you can't see them on the camera, I have 3 analog reel-to-reel machines sitting in my studio right now, and they've only been here for like the last 3 months. I've got a 16-track, 1-inch machine over here, a Tascam MS-16, which I bought in the 80s. It runs at 30 IPS. And then over on my right, I've got my old
Wow.
Tascam 32. It's a Tascam 32. It's a 2-track machine I used to mix down onto. It's a
Yeah,
1/4-inch machine. It runs at 15 IPS. And then next to that, over here, I've got my TAC 3340S, which is a 1/4-inch 4-track machine that I bought in the 70s. And the reason I have them in here has a lot to do with what's been going on my Instagram account and people becoming interested in this, and then me going down this rabbit hole. And I'm kind of diving back into analog, not because I'm trying to make it my main format, but because there's a lot of old recordings I'm pulling out. But there's some interesting things about the process of recording on analog that really got me thinking about how we work. Because I will say this. Okay, here's something I'm going to say. In digital, you can just keep doing takes over and over again. On Pro Tools, just do another take, just do another take. If you punch in and you didn't like it, you can hit undo. But on analog, when you punched in, it erased what was there, so you'd better be committed. And I think I got to this place with the analog thinking about this is because I got into live streaming for a while this last year while I was actually doing sessions, playing guitar, singing, writing songs online while we were streaming. And it got me thinking about how we had to make a commitment right then. I can't sit here and do 50 takes during a stream. People are going to get bored. I got to get it in 2 takes. So it got me thinking about analog. And then when I pulled out the analog machines, I got thinking about there was a level of commitment with analog that I really liked that back then it frustrated me. But the fact that I just had to have my act together and just get it done and move on. Whereas in the digital realm, you can get caught up in just redoing stuff and redoing stuff and redoing stuff till you get it perfect, but you lose some vibe and you can become indecisive. And I think having some commitment and making a decision is very important. So I'm finding myself now in the digital realm kind of swinging back around to actually kind of limiting my choices and limiting the amount of time I spend on things. It's like, let's just get this done because the longer we sit here, we might actually be making it worse by redoing things. Let's go with earlier takes. Let's just make sure we're in the right vibe and that we're prepared.
How do you manage your time effectively during mixing projects, especially when working on multiple projects simultaneously?
Not very well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was afraid of this question. I'm slow because I'm kind of detail oriented. I also try to take on too many projects and then I get involved in things off to the side. So yeah, it's not always good. I'm not a good manager of my time. I will say that. Always been pretty bad at that. So I can't say that I have any process. I just make sure that I work a lot and get down here and try to get things done. But I will say this, when it comes to mixing, I found over the years, it's not a good idea to just stay on one song, like start mixing it and then go all the way to the end in like a 14-hour session for a couple reasons. I think you can lose perspective and your ears can get worn out. So what I do is I'll kind of mix in chunks and because of being able to save it all, I can do that. So maybe I'll go through and kind of work on a song and just kind of get the rhythm section and some of the basic stuff and just kind of quickly check the vocals. And then I'll jump over to another song and work on that. And maybe later on the same day, I'll come back to that first song or the next day, because I've found if I spend too long of a marathon on one song on the mixing process, I can kind of box myself into some corners or head down some directions that later on I have to go back and undo because I got obsessed on something. So I will mix in smaller chunks. Now, that's not the same with production. When I'm producing, I like to do long marathon things and really go down the rabbit hole creatively, but mixing to me can be quite different. So I think that a big part of my process is kind of, and I guess it's time management to some degree, but not spending more than a few hours on each song so I don't get burnout, and also to give myself a chance to come back with a new perspective.
Talking about the future for the next generation, what key advice will you give to young engineers starting their journey in the music industry?
I'd say do a lot of work. Just go out there and do a lot of stuff. Don't get too picky about it. Just do as much as you can and work with different people and try to break out of, you know, maybe you're hanging out with a certain group of people or artists or musicians. Go out and meet other people and try other things. Don't get boxed into that. And I also think that everybody should learn to diversify. Don't stick with one genre alone. Learn other things. Also, try different techniques. And also, I think it's important to get out of the studio. Go out and see music live. Go out and see bands, because I'm a hermit sometimes, and I'll get in the studio and I'll get boxed up and I kind of lose perspective, not only on my skills and all that, but just kind of where my life is going. And sometimes I need to remind myself of other things that are going on. The other thing, and it took me a long time to figure this out, is to go out and meet other people that are doing the same thing you're doing, mixing, engineering, production. When I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of felt like maybe those people were my competitors. They were like people I had to like be careful about. But what I've found over the years is that unlike other parts of the music industry where people are definitely being competitive and doing sneaky,
Mm-hmm.
weird things, in this industry, all the people that should be my competitors are some of my biggest supporters. And actually right now I'm looking at buying a new computer, and I posted it up on a Facebook group, and all the people give me the most amazing advice are all the people that do literally the same exact thing that I do. And I've had people loan me gear, and I've got somebody who's actually a really big mixer who's going to let me borrow a hard drive with some installers on it. He even offered to drive out here to do it. And it's like, it's amazing. And then hanging out with those people, you kind of learn. I learned so much from those people because I see how they work. Usually those guys they want to tell you secrets. They're not going to, they might have some secrets they're going to keep, but they'll tell you, oh, did you try this new plugin? Or have you ever thought about blah, 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 blah. And it's like, man, that's the thing. I didn't realize that when I was younger. So I always tell people, man, find people who are doing the same things that you're doing, and you'll probably find some of the best allies you're ever going to get in your whole life.
Wow, wow. It's very valuable, this vision that you shared with me and with us, of course. And also, are there any specific technical mistakes that young engineers should be particularly cautious about during their mixing process, in your experience, of course?
I'd say the main one is gain staging, meaning, when you start a mix and you've got your faders up too high and just pushing everything too loud, and then you get later in the mix and you find out that all your signals are just like a little too hot going into the plugins or into auxiliaries or buses and stuff like that. So my main thing that I do is when I start a mix, I start by grabbing the faders and bringing them all down halfway at least. Because you know how you're mixing, you just keep pushing the faders up. How often do you actually pull a fader down? We're all, we keep pushing up. So start low, move them up. And then, as far as technical things, I guess this is kind of technical, but I think if it's more of a practice is don't mix too loudly. I mix at a volume that we could have a very normal conversation on top of. I could be sitting here, you and I could be sitting here in this room, and I could be playing the music at the level I mix at, and I could just talk like this to you, and it would be fine. I don't mix very loudly. I do crank it up once in a while, just check low end and stuff like that, but I think you should spend most of your time mixing at a low volume, and also taking frequent breaks. Even if you just walk upstairs to get a glass of water or coffee and come down in 2 minutes, do that. And then also listening to some other source music even if it's just for 45 seconds, because your ears can get tuned to what you're doing.
Talking also about Dolby Atmos support, what are your thoughts about it?
I have not gotten into Atmos at all.
Okay.
I got friends who do it, and I was actually approached by a couple different people about partnering up and building an Atmos studio. And I thought about it, but I'm kind of going somewhere else with my career right now. And I thought, boy, if I get into Atmos, I will stay there the rest of my life. It looks too cool. So I don't really have any opinions about that. I don't even know that much about it. I'm keeping an eye on it, but I'm not
Okay.
in any way an expert on that.
I heard that you have collaborated with a lot of big artists and big names like Ludacris, Lil Jon, Will Smith. Can you share a fun fact or an episode from those collaboration or others?
Yeah, I got a couple. So the first one would
Okay.
be, it was late 90s, and I had just started getting into rap music, and I was working with Bone Crusher, who had the song Never Scared in the early 2000s. And I didn't really know anything about rap music, but there's a long story how I even got into it. It was actually my air conditioner repairman. That's a whole other story I'll have to tell someday. But I was working on a collaboration called Full Contact Sports, and it was a bunch of rappers in Atlanta. None of them were famous at the time. Bone was just another guy around town, like he was doing sessions and all that. It was Lil Jon was on that project, a bunch of people, but I had just met Bone, and he goes in and he does a vocal take, and I thought it was pretty good. He's like a really talented guy. But after the first take, he takes off his headphones, and I can see him taking the headphones off, and said, "Hold on, let's do another take. I think you can do that better." And he's like, "No, it's good." And I was like, "Dude, you're in my studio. If I think you can do a better job," and he's like, "Start to take the headphones off." So I come out of the control room and I walk over to the sound room door, and he opens the door and he sees me standing there, and Bone's huge. He's like twice my size, but I just stood in front of him. I said, "You need to do another take." And he's like, "Little man, what are you doing?" I was like, "You need to do another take." And it kind of freaked everybody out. There are a lot of people there. And the thing about Bone, he's a very talented guy, and he's, a very strong personality that I think people hear the first take and go, "Oh, okay, cool." They're not going to argue with him, but I don't give a damn. So I just stood in front of him, and I think he thought it was funny. And he's like, "All right." So we went back there and did it a couple more times and came out and listened to it. And he's like, "You were right. That was better," because people didn't normally challenge him. And I kind of built my reputation with a lot of people off that day because I actually stood in front of him. And then another story is, when I started working on Lil Jon, I had met him through that same project, but I didn't know that he was kind of famous. He wasn't famous like he is now. He'd had some local hits, and he was working at So Def as an A&R guy, but I didn't really know the extent of what they were doing. So that song that I had played mandolin on, he was on it with Bone Crusher. And I finished the mix and sent it to him. And then one day I'm going to the grocery store and I hear a car go by and I hear that song. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, that must be a friend of Lil Jon's. And Lil Jon happened to give him a cassette. And by some bizarre chance, they were playing it when they drove by, not realizing it was actually on the radio. So I was like, that's kind of weird. Wow, cool. And then I was at the grocery store with my wife, and we're at the checkout counter, and I turned to my wife. She's like, "What are you doing tonight?" I said, "Oh, I got Lil Jon coming in the studio." And the cashier just stopped and looked at me and said, "You work with Lil Jon?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Wow." And I'm thinking, wow, what a coincidence. Lil Jon happens to be friends with this cashier. I had no idea. But then I'm like, hey, maybe he's known, right? I had no idea. So next time he came in the studio, I said, "Hey, man, are you kind of famous or something?" And he just laughed at me. And I was like, oh, wow. I was very clueless at the time. And then I think my third story would be, I was working with Will Smith, and it was a song that Polo Didon had produced. Polo did Drop Them D's and some stuff for Beyonce, like huge producer. I've known Polo since the 90s. And they flew me out to LA to work at Glen Avenue Sound, or I can't remember the name. It's a really nice studio, a big SSL. So it took me 3 days to mix the song. I actually had most of the song done, pretty much the song done in the first day. But the problem was, Will Smith would show up with his whole crew and listen to the song, and totally nice guy. And I tell you, he's one of the funniest guys in the world. I think we spent more time him telling jokes, but we worked on the mix, and then he left. And then Polo had been out playing basketball or something with Jimmy Iovine, and then Polo would come in and change the mix. Like, well, I want to change this, and he'd leave. And then later that night, Will Smith would come in and go, "I don't like that." And it went on for 3 days. They were never in the studio at the same time. And then a couple times they were looking at me like, "Well, why didn't you?" Like, "Look, I'm not producing this. I'm the mixer. If y'all could be in the room at the same time, we could get this thing done." And they never actually were. Somehow we got the mix done, but it was a long process of trying to work between two guys that weren't in the room at the same time. We got it done for Will's album.
Wow, 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 Billy, your fun facts are truly valuable, and thank you so much for sharing with me and with us those experience about also Will Smith and all the artists that you are working on. And I think last question, and looking back on your incredible journey, okay, what aspects of your career do you hope for yourself, and what message would you like to share with aspiring engineers?
Um, I would just say do what you love. Like, what is it you want to do with your life? I mean, we can get caught up in the career aspects of this thing and talk about all this stuff, but I kind of think about, I've always thought about what I want to do with my life. Am I going to get to do what I want to do? A lot of people get caught up in thinking, well, I got to have a job and I got to have this and I got to have that, and or I should have something to fall back on. And I specifically never left myself something to fall back on, because if I did, then I would fall back on it. So I kind of put myself out there and took the chances. And I always remind myself what it is that I actually want to do with my life. And I think that's more of a philosophical thing, but you really need to be thinking about that. I'd also say, be careful who you take advice from. A lot of people give you advice, and usually it's like people that sometimes you think are friends or whatever can give you the worst advice in the world. And I was told so many times over the years to quit. It's a bad idea. And I just ignored them, because I knew that this is what I want to do. If this is what you want to do, stick with it. It's not gonna. I was in my 30s before I actually really made any kind of profit off this. I was doing sessions, but I kept buying gear, so I was always in debt. But I was in my 30s before I had any kind of real success at all, probably my mid-30s, and it took me a long time. And of course, a lot of that in my 20s, I was an artist trying to be a rock star, which is way harder to do. But I just say stick with it. And then the other thing I'd say is, I actually had a little note here. What was the main comment I want to make? Oh, no matter what kind of technical stuff you do or how good you are, it kind of really comes down to who and what you are. Doesn't matter how good you are. You need to be good, but you also need to be a good person. You need to be somebody that people like, and somebody that can understand other people. Make sure that you remember that it's still about relationships. It's about the art and your skills, but it's also about relationships. And I've got some of the people I worked with back in the 90s were still really good friends. And I made a point of making sure that I was a good person and that they knew that I was devoted and honest, and I was going to do my best job always.
Wow. Well, Billy, I'm very proud to hear these words about your life and career experience, about the naysayers, the people that you want to keep in your life. So thank you so much for giving me some times to make this possible, and I hope to see you next time in Rome, maybe, or in Italy.
Sure. Oh, well, yeah, I would love to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Billy. Bye.
See ya.
Mix Talks. Mix it. Talk it.